Graphing polynomials. Okay, so we know the sketch of this graph. We're going to do the x-intercepts are 1, 2, and -5, and then we're going to bounce on that one. So the y-intercept, so if x was 0, so now 1 times -2 squared times 5, that's your y-intercept. So 1 times 4 times 5 equals 20. Okay, so this all together is an x to the 4th. So I'm going to be doing a W shape. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those are the exponents added up. So 1, 2, and a -5. And somewhere I'm going to have to mark 20. So we're going to be going through -5. We're going to go through, oops, sorry, this should be -1 here. Realize that. Through -1. And then we're going to hit up here at a height of 20. And when we get to 2, we're going to bounce and head back up. So I just need one mark somewhere on my scale, the X, to make sure. Okay, so on this one, I don't like this -x in here, so I'm actually going to factor it out, causing that to turn into x minus 2. So 1, 2, 3, 4, this is a 4th degree, and it's negative. So that's my general idea. The x-intercepts will be at 2, -3, and -1. This would be a bounce. And the y-intercept, so if x was 0, this bracket would be 2. This bracket would be 3. And then this bracket would be 1 squared, which ends up being 6. So when I graph 2, -1, and -3 are the x-intercepts, and it has to go through y6. So a negative W shape, so an M, and then where's my bounce? At -1 is my bounce. So through, bounce, through, down. Identify this graph. So 1, 2, 3, 4, it's a -4th. So hey, there's only one possible, D. Okay, sketching this graph, the x-intercepts are 1 and -2. This would be a bounce, this will be a flatten. And the y-intercept, if x was 0, this would be -1 squared. If x was 0, this would be 2 cubed. So this is +1 times 8, which makes 8. So now I'm going to, this is a x to the 5th. So I do know that my arrows will be going in that kind of direction. So at 1 and -2 and up here at 8. So at -2, I'm going to go through with a flatten. And then I have to cross through that. And then off here, I'm going to have to bounce. So 1 and 8. By sketching this graph, the x-intercepts are 1, 3, and -1. 1, 2, 3, and this is a negative, so my general shape will look like that. The y-intercept is -2 times a 0 right there would make the bracket -1, 0 minus 3, 0 plus 1 equals -6. Those are my X-intercepts. They're all cross-throughs, and my Y is down there, so here's my general shape. So 1 and a -6 on that. Okay, the roots of the equation are 2 and -1. Explain what these roots represent on this. So what this would be is on the graph where y is 0, so those would be the x-intercepts on the graph. Identify which one of the following graphs has a 0 with a multiplicity of 3. So we're looking for some kind of flatten. Okay, so that would be right here. Okay, so we're just looking for a flatten. Sketch a graph with these following characteristics. So we need a y-intercept at -9, a 0 at -1 and 3, and the 0 at 1 has a multiplicity of 1, so we're going to cross through it. And the 0 at 3 has a multiplicity of 2. So this would be a cubic. So we're going to need to cross through this, and then we're going to need to bounce off that. So it is going to have to open down. Match with their graph. Okay, so what do we know? 3, 4, 5. This is a fifth. So we do know that. And it's going to have a flatten. And I think it's looking at this, the only one with a flatten. So I need arrowheads in that direction with a flatten. So that would be C. So C is used up. What do I know about this? 2, 3, 4. It's an x to the 4th. So it's going to be a W. So I have these two options. Let's see if there's 3 options. They're all W's. So let's see what the difference is here. This is also a W, but it opens down because of the -2. So that's only A. Okay, so here and here, ooh, they're both W's, because 2, 3, 4. This is the same, this is the same, this is the same. So really, the 2 is what changes. So let's get the y-intercept. So the y-intercept is 2 times 0 plus 1, 1 squared, -1, and 3. So this would have a y-intercept 2 times 1, -6. So that, if I'm, right, we took C out, we took A out. So this one has a -6 and this one has a -3, and that's because of that 2 times versus this one didn't. So this would be D and this would be B. Sketch a graph that satisfies this. It's a polynomial of degree 3, so right now that. It has a leading coefficient of -3. So we already know it's that type. It has a 0 at -3 with a bounce, and it has a 0 at 1. So I'm going to bounce and then cross through. And I don't know anything about the y values, and that's but we need to find it. So we're going to make an equation here. So if it has a 0 at -3 with a multiplicity of 2, it would look like that. And if it has a 0 at 1, that would be the factor, and a leading coefficient of -3. So now if I make this 0, and that's 0, this will turn into a 27. So now I can put a number up there. Sketch these graphs, so 3, 4, 5, and it's a negative. So I know my arrows are going to be going in those directions. So I have an X-intercept at 1, at 3, and at -1, and this is going to flatten. So my Y-intercept is -1 for that front coefficient. This bracket would be -1 cubed if this was 0. 0 minus 3, 0 plus 1. So the Y-intercept comes out to be -3. Okay, so my shape needs to start, I'm just going to put that for myself to remember. And here is my flatten. So I'm going to cross through, flatten, cross through, and then cross back through. Sketching this graph, I have 1, 2, 3, and negative is the leader, so that's my shape. The X-intercepts are going to be at -1, at 2, and at -3. And my Y-intercept is going to equal -1 in the front times a 1 bracket, -2, and a 3. So that is going to be +6. So my shape like that needs to go crossing through all of those. No flattens, no bounces. Okay, this sketch squared, so that makes a 4th positive. So at -1 I'm going to bounce, and at +2 I'm going to bounce. And so I'm just going to draw that. And then what is the Y-intercept? So 3 in the front times 0 plus 1, 1 squared, -2 squared. So 3, 1, 4, that's going to be a 12. So the height on that is 12. Okay, the last one, squared and a 1 make an x cubed, and there's a negative, so I know that is the general shape. X-intercept at 2 and at -3. So I know I'm going to do a bounce there. So there's my general shape with a bounce. So my Y-intercept should hopefully be negative. So Y-intercept is the negative coefficient times this bracket squared times this bracket. So -1 times a 4 times a 3 makes -12. And I better put a label on my x-axis somewhere.